Hey everybody, BerBer here with another episode or chapter of our book club, BerBer's book club, Codependent No More. And let's just dive right in, shall we? If you guys have been watching, I've been making kids videos on like story time with BerBer. After further review, I think I'm just going to do the one age group, 1 through 7. I mean, anybody can watch it, but it's gonna mostly be picture books when I can and junk like that. So let's go ahead and get down to it. Oh, follow my podcast, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook, like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you.
Chapter 3. Codependency. Colette Dowling says, relationships are like a dance, with visible energy racing back and forth between the partners. Some relationships are the slow, dark dance of death. Up to this point, I've been using the words codependent and codependency as lucid terms. However, the definitions of these words remain vague. The definition of chemical dependency means being dependent, psychologically and/or physically, on alcohol or other drugs. Overeating and gambling are also words that bring specific ideas to mind. But what is codependency? The obvious definition would be being a partner in dependency. This definition is close to the truth, but still unclear. It brings no specific image to mind. Codependency is part of treatment-centered jargon, professional slang that's probably unintelligible to people outside that profession, and gibberish to some inside the trade. Jargon may or may not mean anything in particular. Jargon may mean different things to different people, or people may sense what a term means but not be able to clearly define it because it's never been clearly defined. Those are some of the problems I've encountered with researching and attempting to define codependency and codependent. Many people haven't heard the terms. Others, who are familiar with the words, can't define them. If they can, each definition is different. Or people define the words by using more jargon. To complicate matters, I can't find the words in any dictionaries. My computer keeps tagging the words as misspelled, trying to convince me they're not words. Yet, codependency does mean something in particular, something particularly important to me and millions of people. Let's get rid of the jargon and look at that meaning. What's codependency? I have heard and read many definitions of codependency. In an article from the book Codependency, an Emerging Issue, Robert Subby wrote, codependency is an emotional, psychological, and behavioral condition that develops as a result of an individual's prolonged exposure to and practice of a set of oppressive rules. Rules which prevent the open expression of feeling as well as the direct discussion of personal and interpersonal problems. Ernie Larson, another codependency specialist and a pioneer in that field, defines codependency as those self-defeating, learned behaviors or character defects that result in a diminished capacity to initiate or to participate in loving relationships. Some less professional definitions follow. Codependency means, said one woman, that I'm a caretaker. Being codependent means I'm married to an alcoholic, responded one woman. It also means I need to go to Al-Anon. Codependency, replied another, means I'm up to my elbows in alcoholics. It means I'm always looking for someone to glob onto.
No.
Codependency? It means I know any man I'm attracted to, fall in love with, or marry will be chemically dependent or have some other equally serious problem. Codependency, explained one person, is knowing all your relationships will either go on and on the same way, painfully, or end the same way, disastrously, or both. There are almost as many definitions of codependency as there are experiences that represent it. In desperation, or perhaps enlightenment, some therapists have proclaimed codependency is anything and everyone is codependent. So, who's got the inside story? Which definition is accurate? A brief history of codependency will help answer this question. A brief history. The word codependency appeared on the treatment scene in the late 70s. I don't know who discovered it. Although several people may claim to have done so, the word emerged simultaneously in several different treatment centers in Minnesota, according to information from the office of Sandra Smalley, CCDP, a licensed psychologist and a leader in the codependency field. Maybe Minnesota, the heartland of chemical dependency treatment and 12-step programs for compulsive disorders, discovered it. Robert Subby and John Friel, in an article from the book Codependency, an Emerging Issue, wrote, originally it was used to describe the person or persons whose lives were affected as a result of their being involved with someone who is chemically dependent. The codependent spouse or child or lover of someone who is chemically dependent was seen as having developed a pattern of coping with life that was not healthy as a reaction to someone else's drug or alcohol abuse. It was a new name for an old game. Professionals had long suspected something peculiar happened to people who were closely involved with chemically dependent people. Some research had been done on the subject, indicating a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual condition similar to alcoholism seemed to appear in many non-alcoholic or non-chemically dependent people who were close to an alcoholic. Words, more jargon, which would later become synonymous for codependent, surfaced to describe this phenomenon. Co-alcoholic, non-alcoholic, para-alcoholic. Codependents certainly felt the effects of codependency long before the word was coined. In the 1940s, after the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous, a group of people, primarily wives of alcoholics, formed self-help support groups to deal with the ways their spouse's alcoholism affected them. They didn't know they would later be called codependents. They did know they had been directly affected by their mate's alcoholism. And they were envious that alcoholics had a 12-step program to recover through. The wives also wanted a program. So they used the AA 12-step program, revised the AA 12 traditions, changed its name to Al-Anon, and it worked. Millions of people have since benefited from Al-Anon. The basic thought then, and in 1979 when the word codependency emerged, was codependents, co-alcoholics or para-alcoholics, were people whose lives had become unmanageable as a result of living in a committed relationship with an alcoholic. However, the definition for codependency has expanded since then. Professionals began to better understand the effects of the chemically dependent person on the family, and the effects of the family on the chemically dependent person. Professionals began to identify other problems such as overeating and undereating, gambling, and certain sexual behaviors. These compulsive disorders paralleled the compulsive disorder or illness of alcoholism. Professionals also began to notice many people in close relationships with these compulsive people developed patterns of reacting and coping that resembled the coping patterns of people in relationships with alcoholics. Something peculiar had happened to these families too. As professionals began to understand codependency better, more groups of people appeared to have it. Adult children of alcoholics, people in relationships with emotionally or mentally disturbed persons, people in relationships with chronically ill people, parents of children with behavior problems, people in relationships with irresponsible people, professionals, nurses, social workers, and others in helping occupations. Even recovering alcoholics and addicts noticed they were codependent, and perhaps had been long before becoming chemically dependent. Codependence started cropping up everywhere. When a codependent discontinued his or her relationship with a troubled person, the codependent frequently sought another troubled person and repeated the codependent behaviors with that new person. These behaviors, or coping mechanisms, seemed to prevail throughout the codependent's life, if that person didn't change these behaviors. Was it safe to assume codependency was triggered through relationships with people who have serious illnesses, behavior problems, or destructive compulsive disorders? Alcoholism in the family helped create codependency, but many other circumstances seem to produce it also. One fairly common denominator was having a relationship, personally or professionally, with troubled, needy, or dependent people. But a second, more common denominator seemed to be the unwritten, silent rules that usually develop in the immediate family and set the pace for relationships. These rules prohibit discussion about problems, open expression of feelings, direct, honest communication, realistic expectations such as being human, vulnerable, or imperfect, selfishness, trust in other people and oneself, playing and having fun, and rocking the delicately balanced family canoe through growth or change, however healthy and beneficial that movement might be. These rules are common to alcoholic family systems that can emerge in other families too. Now I return to an earlier question. Which definition of codependency is accurate? They all are. Some describe the cause, some the effects, some the overall condition, some the symptoms, some the patterns, and some the pain. Codependency either meant or has come to mean all the definitions listed earlier. I'm not trying to confuse you. Codependency has a fuzzy definition because it is a gray, fuzzy condition. It is complex, theoretical, and difficult to completely define in one or two sentences. Why all this fuss about a definition? Because I'm going to attempt the difficult. Define codependent in one sentence. And I want you to see the broader picture before I show you the narrower one. I hope this approach might help you identify codependency in yourself, if that identification is appropriate. Defining the problem is important because it helps determine the solution. Here, the solution is vital. It means feeling better. It means recovery. So, here is my definition of a codependent. A codependent person is one who has let another person's behavior affect him or her, and who is obsessed with controlling that person's behavior. The other person might be a child, an adult, a lover, a spouse, a brother, a sister, a grandparent, a parent, a client, or a best friend. He or she could be an alcoholic, a drug addict, a mentally or physically ill person, a normal person who occasionally has sad feelings, or one of the people mentioned earlier. But the heart of the definition and recovery lies not in the other person, no matter how much we believe it does. It lies in ourselves, in the ways we have let other people's behavior affect us, and in the ways we try to affect them. The obsessing, the controlling, the obsessive helping, caretaking, low self-worth bordering on self-hatred, self-repression, abundance of anger and guilt, peculiar dependency on peculiar people, attraction to and tolerance for the bizarre, other-centeredness that results in abandonment of self, communication problems, intimacy problems, and an ongoing whirlwind trip through the 5-stage grief process. Is codependency an illness? Some professionals say codependency isn't a disease. They say it's a normal reaction to abnormal people. Other professionals say codependency is a disease. It's a chronic, progressive illness. They suggest codependents want and need sick people around them to be happy in an unhealthy way. They say, for instance, the wife of an alcoholic needed to marry an alcoholic and chose him because she unconsciously thought he was an alcoholic. Furthermore, she needed him drinking and socking it to her to feel fulfilled. This latter judgment may be overly harsh. I'm convinced codependents need less harshness in their lives. Other people have been hard enough on us. We've been hard enough on ourselves. Friends, we have suffered enough. We have been victimized by diseases and people. Each of us must decide what part we played in our victimization. I don't know if codependency is or isn't an illness. I'm not an expert. But to tell you what I believe, let me complete the brief history of codependency which I started earlier in this chapter. Although the first Al-Anon groups were formed in the 1940s, I'm certain we could go back to the beginning of time and human relationships and find glimmers of codependent behavior. People have always had problems, and others have always cared for their troubled friends and relatives. People have likely been caught up with the problems of others since relationships began. Codependency probably trailed man as he struggled through the remaining BC years, right up to these generally wretched times of the 20th century, as Morley Safer of 60 Minutes says. Ever since people first existed, they've been doing all the things we label codependent. They've worried themselves sick about other people. They've tried to help in ways that didn't help. They've said yes when they meant no. They've tried to make other people see things their way. They've bent over backward to avoid hurting people's feelings, and in so doing, have hurt themselves. They've been afraid to trust their feelings. They have believed lies and then felt betrayed. They've wanted to get even and punish others. They have felt so angry they wanted to kill. They've struggled for their rights while other people said they didn't have any. They've worn sackcloth because they didn't believe they deserved silk. Codependents have undoubtedly done good deeds, too. By their nature, codependents are benevolent, concerned about and responsive to the needs of the world. As Thomas Wright writes in an article from the book Codependency, an Emerging Issue, I suspect codependents have historically attacked social injustice and fought for the rights of the underdog. Codependents want to help. I suspect they have helped, but they probably died thinking they didn't do enough and were feeling guilty. It's natural to want to protect and help the people we care about. It's also natural to be affected by and react to the problems of people around us. As a problem becomes more serious and remains unresolved, we become more affected and react more intensely to it. The word react is important here. However you approach codependency, however you define it, and from whatever frame of reference you choose to diagnose and treat it, codependency is primarily a reactionary process. Codependents are reactionaries. They overreact. They underreact. But rarely do they act. They react to the problems, pains, lives, and behaviors of others. They react to their own problems, pains, and behaviors. Many codependent reactions are reactions to stress and uncertainty of living or growing up with alcoholism and other problems. It's normal to react to stress. It is not necessarily abnormal, but it is heroic and life-saving to learn how to not react and to act in more healthy ways. Most of us, however, need help to learn to do that. Perhaps one reason some professionals call codependency a disease is because many codependents are reacting to an illness such as alcoholism. Another reason codependency is called a disease is because it's progressive. As the people around us become sicker, we may begin to react more intensely. What began as a little concern may trigger isolation, depression, emotional or physical illness, or suicidal fantasies. One thing leads to another, and things get worse. Codependency may not be an illness, but it can make you sick. And it can help the people around you stay sick. Another reason codependency is called a disease is because codependent behaviors, like many self-destructive behaviors, become habitual. We repeat habits without thinking. Habits take on a life of their own. Whatever problem the other person has, codependency involves a habitual system of thinking, feeling, and behaving toward ourselves and others that can cause us pain. Codependent behaviors or habits are self-destructive. We frequently react to people who are destroying themselves. We react by learning to destroy ourselves. These habits can lead us into or keep us in destructive relationships, relationships that don't work. These behaviors can sabotage relationships that may otherwise have worked. These behaviors can prevent us from finding peace and happiness with the most important person in our lives, ourselves. These behaviors belong to the only person each one of us can control, the only person we can change, ourselves. These are our problems. In the next...
Okay, everybody, so let's talk about it. So, sorry, I have an issue sitting still because I have ADD real bad. So don't mind me. So, Colette Dowling, I really thought that was a great quote that she said, relationships are like a dance, and some relationships are the slow, dark dance of death. Which one are you in? Which one am I in? Which one do I feel my last relationship was? Maybe every relationship since. Honestly, to answer that question, every relationship that has not worked out was clearly the slow, dark dance of death. Let's just put it that way. Or I wouldn't be reading this book, right? So, codependency means, to me, I wrote this down because it was really interesting that she said at that one part, codependency meant preventing the discussion of feelings or interpersonal relationships when we're young. I believe that that's where I got mine, but I also had alcoholics, so, in my family. Then I put codependency to me. I figured I would, kind of answer her when she was saying, what is it to you? What's your definition? Everybody seems to have one. And my definition, I would definitely say, would be, as a child, we learned how to care for others over ourselves, or as more of a priority to our own well-being. They have dependency to an issue, so we help them continue the behavior. Now, then she said what codependency is to, the definition of codependency to her was, I believe chemical dependency creates caretakers, and who over concentrates on others issues over our own well-being. Codependent let another person's behavior affect them and begin believing we can control the other person's bad behavior or by changing that person. Nobody can change unless they want to for themselves. You can't make someone else change. And please don't ever think that marriage, a baby, a pet, no matter how much sex you give a guy, a cheater will be a cheater. A liar will be a liar. An abuser will be an abuser. An alcoholic will be an alcoholic. Other people's issues are not your issue. But how you react to the issue is the issue. And I think that's what Melody was trying to tell us, is that we've got to stop thinking we can fix people, because they're not going to change unless they're ready or unless they want to. So we need to only work on what we can control, which is ourselves. We can only change us. We can only work on us. I can only work on me. I can't work on my ex. I can't change him, but I can change me and how I react or allow him to affect me or not affect me by lack of communication. Now, once again, like when I was in anger management, I wrote this down because, real quick, just on that point she was making where she was saying the guy was saying like, oh, maybe codependents want this, this, and this. Maybe an abused woman wants this, this, and this. No, nobody wants mistreatment. But the other thing I wrote down was I've taken anger management classes, and so once again, I'm hearing the word act. Now, how we choose to act on our feelings are the issues. Codependents react instead of making a change in how you act. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of, they react, but they're not making any action. Like if you're dealing with an alcoholic and you don't want to deal with that anymore, leave. If he's beating you, leave. If he's cheating on you, leave. If it's an issue with your own child, get them help. Seek assistance. If it's somebody you can't let go of, but if it's somebody that you're able to let go of, if it's somebody you really could live without, just let them go. I'm never, ever telling people don't ever let go of your children. Always help them. Always offer them help. Always offer to help find them help. But just don't ever give up on a child, but a grown adult, a husband, a wife, a friend, let that motherfucker go. If they unhealthy for you and your well-being, then screw them, is what I say. But I'm sure I've rambled long enough. I'll see you guys next time for our BerBer's Book Club, Codependency No More. You guys have an excellent Sunday.